Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Remembering the Legendaries with Jim Irwin, the show that honors Wayne State University faculty and staff of the past, remembering their enormous contributions to making Wayne State the great university it is today. He's a local businessman, a best-selling author, and a published songwriter. He has 2 degrees from Wayne State and is honored as a distinguished university alumnus. Let's give a big welcome to our host, Jim Irwin.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Remembering the Legendaries, the show where we take a look at people who have had an impact on this wonderful university of ours, who have made such contributions to the university that it's put us on the map, nationwide and sometimes worldwide. And this, again, is a series where we take a look now at the journalism department and the people who made that famous. And here we are, right in the heart of this wonderful university, the university of real people. And it's such fun to do these things. Wouldn't you agree with that, huh? Okay. All right, good. So let's take a look at our first guest. We're going to examine journalism all the way through with the important impact people. And we're going to start out with the man in charge, the Dean, Matt Seeger. His name is Matthew Wayne Seeger. The joke is, do you think the dean is into his job? Are you kidding? His middle name is Wayne. So let's welcome Matt Seeger. Well, Matt, here we are again, taking a look at journalism as the discipline. We've talked about in the past the communication department and the impact that journalism has had on our university at least equals the impact that the other departments have had, including communication. So we're here to talk about journalism and ask you just to give us your impression of journalism as it used to exist, the way when you first came to the university, and the way it is now. Just give us a brief synopsis.
Sure. Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks so much for hosting this program again. And I'm just delighted to have a chance to talk about the journalism program, which is really one of the most important programs we have at the university. It has a really amazing history. The journalism program was really founded at Wayne State University in the 1930s. Before Wayne State was Wayne State University, we were still the Detroit City College, Wayne College back then. And it was housed in the English department. And, through the years, it grew and it expanded, and we had this amazing newspaper, student newspaper, the Collegian, which had actually been founded earlier. And the program, the journalism program really was thriving, a lot of interest in it, but it wasn't doing quite so well in the English department. The English faculty, weren't as interested in the profession of journalism as the faculty wanted it to be. Sure. So in the 1970s...
You don't write a newspaper about Chaucer.
Well, you don't. You're right. Chaucer's okay, but it's not the Detroit News or the Detroit Free Press.
You bet. Yeah.
So in the early 1970s, the director of the program at that particular time, a man by the name of Sprague Holden, began arguing that the program needed to be independent. So it left the English department at that time and joined what was at that point the very large Department of Speech and Theater and Communication Disorders and Sciences, and journalism joined that program.
So it went from a player in English to a rookie.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
So as a rookie, it began.
It began in the communication department then as a fully formed program.
Did it grow fast, slow?
It grew quite quickly because there was such an interest in the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News. Many of the faculty were...
and the Detroit Times.
And the Detroit Times at that time, yes. Right. So there was a lot of the faculty were working professional journalists, and the students were really very interested in that. They really gravitated to that because... Wayne students are very interested in jobs and very interested in career paths. So they saw this as a great way to have a career path.
Right. Okay, that makes nothing but good sense for it to be independent like that.
Yes.
Because it would draw those students from that area.
Yeah.
How would you compare journalism back then when it first started in terms of growth and what it began to really be impacted with the newspapers in town?
Sure.
How did that happen, and what's your evaluation of it?
So, back in the 70s and even before, we were still working on those old machines called typewriters. You may remember those.
I think I do.
Yeah. Most of our students today don't really remember what a typewriter is, and they're quite fascinated by those ancient machines. And we did layout for newspapers by hand. We were still doing manual presses, so we had people setting type for producing newspapers. So it was a very different industry just in terms of the technology at that time. So we taught things like layout and design, and we had places where the students would have banks of typewriters, and they had to be able to type to be journalists.
So in other words, they could go through the entire spectrum of education here, from the typesetters, the mailers, the writers.
We didn't teach typesetting that I know of, but we did the layout and design design courses. And of course, we taught photojournalism, and there was a wonderful photographer who was associated with the Free Press named Tony Spina, who was internationally recognized, and he taught for us.
Still is.
Yes, and we had a lot of, as I said, working full-time journalist professionals who would teach for us, and that really attracted students and created a kind of professional orientation, a professional grounding in this program that you just didn't see elsewhere.
That's great. Well, thank you, Matt. We're going to ask you to talk about Ben Burns, the real impact player, but let's bring in the boss. She runs this show. She produces it, directs it, handles all the technology, and she's currently the person in charge of journalism as well, and an impact player in her own right. Let's welcome Kim Piper-Aiken, my boss.
Hi, Jim.
Well, Kim, we just briefly talked with Matt about a background in the history of journalism.
Right.
And you live it every day, and you're in charge of the department right now, the aspects of production, as well as you're the head of the field right now, the head of the area. And what is your impression right now as you see it within the university as a strong entity and a power?
I have been here 12 years. Matt Seeger and Ben Burns, who we'll talk a lot about today, who I consider to be just a groundbreaking legend in our journalism program at Wayne State University, hired me to sort of beef up the broadcast journalism area. Historically, that's my area of expertise. I had a 20-plus year career as a broadcaster and broadcast journalist. And so I see that the transitions have changed quite a bit involving electronic media in terms of news and how that's structured. I think we see less emphasis on sort of the traditional style of newspaper, although newspapers will always be relevant.
Well, Matt talked about typesetting. You don't do that, but layout, photography, and all that. And that's less emphasized now than it used to be.
Sure. And now so much of everything we do is online. So our two concentrations in journalism now are print online and broadcast journalism. So whether we're reading a newspaper like the New York Times, the Detroit Free Press, the Detroit News, on our pads, in our laptops, whatever it might be, or on my phone. I access all of the news outlets on the phone. I think journalism is as relevant as it's ever been. We have good, strong enrollment in the journalism program at Wayne State University. And here again, we still have a really strong emphasis on professionals. All of the faculty members, for the most part, have had a very extensive professional career before they, in some level, became academics. And so I think that's really the strength of the Wayne State
We're going to talk to
journalism
some people
program
today who really have had a tremendous professional background.
Exactly.
One of them is an author and highly published, highly respected, and 50 years at this university, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say in terms of his perspective. What we're going to take a look at, though, this is a program about the Legendaries. And there's one person who can best be described as a legendary, the impact player who took this program, and through personal effort and through contacts and through hard work, built it into what it is today. And that man is Ben Burns. So I'd like to ask you, Matt, since you worked with Ben and Ben hired you, let's talk about Ben. You first, Matt. What kind of a person, as you remember him to be?
Well, the first thing I would say about Ben Burns is he was very, very tall.
Yes.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, he was, I'm not sure exactly how tall, but certainly he towered over me. And he had quite a presence. And not only a physical presence, but a professional presence. He had been, in editorial positions throughout the country and certainly at the Detroit News. So he really came into the program with this incredible status and presence. And that really helped elevate the status of the program. So we had someone running the program at that time who had incredible professional experience and incredible professional credentials. And at the same time, Ben was this very, very warm, approachable, supportive person. He was a mentor to so many of us, and just really a warm and supportive person who was interested in growing the program and so interested in the success of
Matt,
others.
did he help you grow? Because you came here as an assistant professor, a shave-tailed guy, if you will, and now you're dean. I mean, you're the honcho. You're it.
Well,
how did Ben help you get there?
I'm not sure I'm it, but Ben was very, very supportive of me. I was quite green when I first came in, and Ben was incredibly supportive of me early in my career. He mentored me, he advised me, and I remember quite vividly him saying to me at one point when I was visiting him in his office, he said, "Someday you'll be a good administrator at this university. Someday." Obviously, I wasn't quite there yet. But even when I served as department chair, I knew Ben had incredible administrative experience. He had great managerial skills. So whenever I faced a thorny problem, I would go down and spend some time in his office. Usually we'd spend about 20 minutes talking about fishing and about 5 minutes talking about the problem. But I always came out of those meetings.
Sounds like our
with a
kind of guy.
solution. He's a very, very wonderful man. And
We like fishing, both of us.
yes, we do.
All three of us.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. You do too. I'm going to ask you. We talked about Ben, the professional, Ben, the person to work with, the professor, the leader, and so on. And you can talk about Ben as a teacher, as how he related to students, because after all, that's what this university is about, students. Am I right? Absolutely. All right? Okay. How did Ben relate to the students, and how did he impact student life here at Wayne?
First of all, Ben was very wise. I was astounded from time to time when he would say things that would solve problems very, very efficiently. He was approachable. He was very tall. But he allowed students, and I think he allowed the faculty members, at least this was my experience, the freedom to do their best. He never tried to micromanage. He just allowed students to sort of do their thing, to fly with the expectation of excellence. See, I think,
Okay, now
Jim,
you're
you have
saying,
to understand.
to some extent, he was tough.
Yes.
He had to be tough. You don't become an impact player unless you're tough. So he had to be tough.
Tough but approachable.
Okay.
So I mean, he had that very, very special characteristic. Yes, he could be very tough, and he could be a taskmaster because he expected excellence. He wanted journalism to be more than it has been sometimes in the past. And so I think the thing I learned most from Ben is to expect excellence. Because if you expect excellence from students, you have a much more likely possibility and probability of having students be excellent. And I've seen it every single day in the 12 years I've been here. But I think Ben was just the kind of person, as a mentor and a teacher, to help students reach their full potential.
How do you think, either one of you, Ben impacted the city and the journalism professionals, the 3 newspapers at the time? How did he impact them?
Well, I think, partly by his professional presence, he brought this incredible professionalism and credibility to the journalism profession. but also he impacted the newspaper business and the news business.
He knew those people?
He knew those people, but he impacted that business and that whole industry in Detroit by the people he trained. So, he trained, all the major people who were writers and broadcasters in Southeast Michigan. So he had impact on all of them. And we did a number of things in the department. I know we're going to talk a little bit later on about the Journalism Institute for Media Diversity, but part of his impact was really to address the diversity problem in media and really come up with a very intentional program to bring a wider set of voices into journalism. And that had a profound impact, not only here in the city of Detroit, but nationally.
And it still continues to be amazing. It's 35 years now that the GYM program has been in place, and it's still going strong. The students that are graduating that are currently in the program, they do multiple internships. They themselves are just excellent. And this was very groundbreaking at the time, and we'll have another guest, Luther Keith, to talk about that.
We're going to be lucky enough to have Luther Keith himself here with us on our stage, which is a real positive thing. A legend in his own right. So, and we're lucky to have them. And then we're also going to have some other people. Beverly Burns.
Correct.
Beverly Hall Burns, who's in her own field of law, is a legend, but she's here to talk about her late husband. And last but not least, Burl
Fallbaum
is going to be here. And Burl is a tremendously experienced professional, an author, a journalist. He mainly talked about, he can talk about his years of teaching here at Wayne. He has taught here at Wayne for 45 years and 50 years with the university. Mm-hmm. So our guests today are astounding. So looking forward to it. One thing about your memories of Ben is they're all positive. Sounds like he was a pretty strong leader.
Yeah, I think the thing that was so impressive about Ben for me was his incredible managerial experience. So, he'd managed one of the major newspapers in the country. So he really brought tremendous expertise to that. And he understood leadership. He understood what it was to model excellence and model the behaviors you wanted to see of others. He was very, very organized. He held regular meetings, but they were always very approachable. And he always had a very large jar of candy on his desk.
What kind of candy?
Well, a variety of different kinds of candy, but mostly hard candy, as I recall.
And chocolate.
Yeah. But that was sort of a really good metaphor for who he was. He was a very, professional manager, in some ways a very strong manager, but he had the sweet side.
Okay, let's use our imagination. I have a microphone here. Ben Burns is sitting next to me, so I ask him, Ben, what do you think of Matt Seeger? What would he say? What would he say?
I can't believe he turned out this way. So, yeah, he would, I suspect, be happy with where we are, what we've done. He was very forward thinking. I think that journalism has changed so much. I think he would be surprised at where journalism is. I think he would be delighted with what Kim Piper-Aiken has done with the broadcasting.
Well, wait a minute. Okay, give him a chance to say that. Here's the microphone. I say, Ben, what do you think of Kim Piper-Aiken? What's he going to say?
I think Ben would be proud of where I've come in the last 12 years. I'm extremely proud of the broadcast journalism curriculum that Ben allowed me to develop. He brought me in and said, it's yours. But I think he'd be very, very proud, not just of that, but of also of the sort of, the studio here and the kinds of things that have allowed our students to grow, not just from a journalism standpoint, but also the technology. So our students when they graduate, they get this very, very strong professional underpinning, but they also get the technical skills they're going to need to be competitive in broadcast journalism or in media arts and studies, which I have a joint appointment in both of those. But I think Ben would probably be glad he hired me.
Well, and I'm sure you're proud of the students too, because sometimes for me, I say real people, but I also mean real student people. That In fact, I believe you told me one time that the students here are not like other universities where it's all about grades. The ones who are in your classes are here because they want to learn something and they want to be productive. Many of them hold jobs and they come here because they want to improve themselves. That's something you don't find at many of the large universities. And that's why Wayne State, real people, isn't it great to be here though? What do you think, guys? You betcha. Well, thank you. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Matt. We're now going on to a great part of our program where we invite people to talk about the things and amplify what we've talked about here. And I can't wait to meet them. So
Good.
We'll see you later. Let's take a break. Let's thank these people. All right. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Okay, thank you. Let's welcome Beverly Hall Burns. Welcome, Beverly. Well,
Thank you.
we're talking about Ben Burns.
Isn't that fun?
Oh, yes, a legend. This is Remembering the Legendaries, and he is a legend, and as his wife for so many years, nobody knows him better. So we're going to ask you, what kind of a guy was he in terms of everyday life?
Well, I'll tell you just a couple stories, I guess. Maybe that would be the best way to go about it. First of all, Ben was a guy who had a wonderful sense of joy. And he used to use the word ebullient a lot, and he was ebullient. I fell in love with Ben the first time I laid eyes on him, and I wrote my mother a letter, and I said, I met the man I'm going to marry today. And 2 years later, we were married, and he was my best friend for 40 years until he died in 2012. He also was my boss when I first met him because I was the feature editor at a newspaper in Lansing, and he came to the newspaper to be our managing editor. So I worked with him as an editor for several years, and he was
kind of
an
boss was
amazing.
he?
He was probably the best boss I ever had, and
How about co-workers? Was he popular in your opinion?
He was popular in everybody's opinion,
Okay.
I think. He had a good sense of humor, which was very helpful in being a good boss, very demanding, very high expectations.
And where was this again?
This was in Lansing, Michigan,
Lansing?
at the State Journal.
Lansing State Journal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he was the editor?
He came to us as the managing editor.
Managing editor, okay. And you were?
And I was, at that time, the features editor. Then I became the city editor. And I'll tell you just a very short story that to me exemplifies Ben's insistence on the highest standards in journalism and his willingness to stand up for what he thought was right, and the reality that he always had your back if you worked with and for him. When I was the city editor, we did an extensive investigation of some reported graft and corruption in the city government in Lansing, and indeed it turned out to be so. And so we ran a long piece, an investigative piece, and the day after, or a couple days after it ran, our publisher called Ben into his office on the carpet and read him out for having run that story. because it negatively affected some of the publisher's friends. And the publisher said, because I was the city editor at the time, he said, Ben, you're going to have to fire Beverly. And I wasn't in the publisher's office at the time, but I was in the newsroom. And Ben came out, and he looked pretty stern. And he walked to his office, which had glass walls, so you could see what was going on. And he started pulling things out of file cabinets and packing things up. And it turned out that when the publisher told him he had to fire me, he said, no, if someone is going to leave on account of this, it'll be me. And he quit on the spot, which to me demonstrates the standards that he had and his willingness to be there for his people.
To back up what was
back
done.
up his people.
Yeah. That's a good story. He certainly was a man of integrity. Mm-hmm. What made him come to Wayne State?
I was afraid you'd ask that. Ben, I think, had he had his druthers, he would maybe not have come to Wayne State. He transitioned from the Detroit News, where he was the executive editor, to Wayne State in significant part because of what in our family we've always referred to as the Friday Night Massacre, and that was the night when all of the top management of the Detroit News was fired, including Ben. It had to do with the entry of Gannett to the marketplace. This was a very difficult time, and not too long after that massacre, Ben came to Wayne State for the first time. And he was a man who had a wonderful ability to find opportunity in chaos and crisis. And he had the opportunity to be a founder of the Journalism Institute for Minorities, which is what it was called at its inception. And that began a long career for him here at Wayne State.
Well, do you think, here's a man at the top of his profession, executive editor of a major newspaper. And here's Wayne State, an institution, a great place here in Detroit, but a place who didn't have a tremendous journalism department. So here he comes, he's fired. Do you think, in your opinion, that he embraced this at first, or was it or did he find it as a place to be where he might be able to use his talent? How did he feel, in your opinion?
I think he did everything he could to embrace this opportunity from the get-go, because I think he saw that there was a real need for a fine journalism program at Wayne State. There was also a real need to have a program that focused at the time that the Journalism Institute for Minorities was created, that a program that focused on developing journalists who were, I don't know if he called it this, but urban journalists, people who worked in journalism
and
in an urban environment.
They lived the life and they could write about it.
And so he thought that was really important. I do think that the contrast between working on a daily newspaper where at that time you put out a newspaper every day, right? It's much more seamless now, it's going on all the time. But at that time you published a newspaper every day. So you had deadlines every day, you put the newspaper out, and then people read it and they threw it away. But there was a great deal of pressure, stress, long, hard days, and teamwork, and Ben thrived on that. And then he came to a university where, for all of its wonderful qualities,
tomorrow's okay.
I think there was not that sense of urgency, and there wasn't the immediate gratification of putting out that paper every day. So it was a change for him. But what he found here was a group of students every year who were amazing, young and sometimes not so young people. The demographic of the student body here was just, or probably still is, incredible, age-wise, race-wise, gender-wise, whatever. And he loved that.
But it had to be a two-way street because he stayed. And he finished his career at Wayne. It had to be a two-way street. The students had to give him something as well as him giving the students something. How do you react to that statement?
Well, I think what the students gave back to him in some ways was a mirror of what he had given to journalism already, and that was his sense of his persistence, his creativity, his interest in getting things right, his discipline, his passion. He had students who reflected all of that then, and I'm sure even though he's been gone from this program since 2012, I'm sure that that's reflected in the journalism students who are here today.
You know, it's amazing how I can walk down this campus now versus walking down the campus that I remember back in the late 1950s. And students there, including myself, we didn't live on campus. We worked. And we took classes when we could. We had a quest for a degree because we wanted to do something different than working in the drugstore that put us through school. And I come here today and I look at the students and they're like we were. They're working, they're putting themselves through school. Some people have scholarships, but they earn those scholarships and they're real people. And so that's one of the reasons why I identified, and I'm willing to bet that Ben identified with that same thing. The students who are real people.
Oh, I think he did. I think he was often amazed at what his students were able to accomplish as students when they were also working, sometimes at full-time jobs. They may have had transportation issues. They may have had children. I can't tell you the number of times he would come home and he would talk about one of his students who brought her or his child to class because, well, that's what you do, you know. And Ben was always very proud of his students' accomplishments. I remember one time, we lived in Grosse Pointe for a long time, and there was a restaurant in Grosse Pointe where one of Ben's journalism students worked as a bartender. And this young man got his first newspaper job. And Ben came home from Wayne State that day, and he said, we have to go up to this restaurant where the young man worked. And I said, well, why do we have to do that? And he said, well, we have to celebrate because he got a job. So we walked in, and here's the young man making drinks behind the bar. But Ben was so excited for him that he wanted to go and celebrate. And when Ben was dying, the young man wrote him a note and said that he would always remember that because he thought that Ben was even more excited about his job than the young man was.
Let's do some imagination here. Why don't you play the part of Ben for a second?
Oh,
and I'll be the interviewer.
I'm short.
No, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to ask you, Ben, describe your students of today and pick a year, 2002, 3, whatever. Pick a year. Tell me about your students that you have in your classes right now. What are they like?
My students today in my classes are as smart and have as much potential as any journalism or college student in this country. And they are determined to succeed. They sometimes fall short of their own expectations. They sometimes fall short of my expectations. But I am always confident in their ability to step up to anyone's expectations, including their own, and I hope that I would be able to help them to be better than they ever thought they could be.
That's great. It sounds to me like Ben was the kind of person that had such an impact on this university that people not only remember him fondly, but they remember his toughness and his character and his drive and his determination. Mm-hmm. And I think he had the extra D, because everybody's determined, everybody's has dedication. Everybody is going to give as much desire as they can, those 3 Ds. Not very many people have that 4th D. Sounds to me like Ben had it. That 4th D is discipline. Was he a disciplined man?
He had discipline, and I'm going to tell you a private story about Ben Burns, which will just say that he had discipline in all of the right places when it was important in his profession and in his standards, his insistence on excellence. However, he had an office in our home which I would never dare to even walk into because it was such a D for disaster area. So yeah, he had discipline wherever it was necessary, and in a couple of areas he didn't.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, Beverly Hall Burns, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much. The audience appreciated that. You've done well. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Hey. All right. We've been talking about students, and I should let you know that this is a student production. Students obviously make up the audience. Students are involved in behind the camera. Students are in the control room. So let's hear it for the real people of Wayne State, the students. Hey. And our next guest can talk about students. He's been teaching here for 45 years. Let's meet in person Burl Fawbaum. Burl. Hey. Welcome, Burl. What an amazing, amazing career you have had and are still having. As a professional, as Kim said, you've done so much. I've been privileged to read some of what you've written, your great book about Shanghai, and plus the things that you've done in the world of journalism makes you a very special person and a valuable person here to Wayne State.
Well, thank you so much.
And I want to ask you, right off the bat, I want you to compare the students of 45 years ago to what you see today. Because I've already told them in the program that when I went to school here, we were all working. We all came here trying to do something, better ourselves. And the kids today are doing the same thing. Yeah. But how do you characterize them over the years as changing, evolving, and that sort of thing?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very kind introduction. I hope my wife listens to that. But on a serious note, I taught at night all the 45 years. I never taught during the day. And you have a different kind of student at night, somebody who works all day and then has to come to class and listen to me for 3.5 hours. That takes a tremendous, tremendous commitment. I don't think the students have changed in terms of a commitment to journalism. You know, the techniques have changed. You know, we have the internet now, we have Twitter and all the computer. But the basic commitment to journalism, I don't think has changed much. I continue to teach for two reasons. One, they kept asking me back because I wasn't getting it right. They kept saying, you got to come back. And two, there's such a thrill out of seeing a student develop. You know, and a lead that's written clearly and is exciting is so invaluable.
45 years ago, the student that came here at night working versus 20 years ago versus today.
Yeah.
How do you see the evolution, if any?
The evolution has mostly been in technology. The commitment to writing hasn't changed and what they want to do and so forth. But obviously we went from a typewriter. I went from a 1923 Royal to a computer. You know, I didn't want to do it, but I understood the value of it.
Sure.
And so I don't think the philosophical commitment has changed, but the technological thing has changed. And frankly, on the negative sides, because I consider myself a newspaper man, and the negative sides had tremendous negative impact on newspapers. You know, they're dying through, and that bothers me.
Sure.
Of course, there are other kinds of media in, you know, on Yahoo and all the technological thing, but I still like a newspaper, and so that bothers me.
Well, that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
How would you characterize your students, though? They all came to work at night. Did you see any kind of diversion later on before? By that I mean maybe 45 years ago they all wanted to write. 20 years ago they wanted to write and edit. And today what do they want to do? How do you see that change?
A couple of changes. One, demographically it's changed tremendously. When I started to teach, we're all men.
All men.
All men.
Interesting. Right.
All men. And slowly, you know, all white men. And so that has changed to the better over the years.
Thank God, yes.
Yeah, thank God. And women started enrolling, and blacks started. And I was at the news when the first woman was hired for the city room. Before that, if you hired a woman, she was sent up to what was called a women's section, and she'd write about weddings and so forth. Mm-hmm. Well, that's changed for the better.
Thank God.
Yeah,
Right.
and the first black reporter at the news, William Matney, who passed away from cancer early. So that has had a tremendous impact on journalism for the better.
Oh, of course.
We got the diversity,
Right.
and of course our whole culture has changed. I still continue to wear a tie, you know, for the 45 years, and everybody looked at me and said, "What's that thing around your neck?"
Sure.
And you had.
We don't wear ties
That's
anymore.
right.
I
And
wore
so-
them for years.
So and jeans and so forth, but the
Any
demographic.
change, by the way, let's just talk about demographics, how students change. What they dress like 45 years ago versus 20 years ago in the 60s versus now.
Well, that's interesting because when I first started out in 1968, Sprague Holden hired me. He was a journalism director at the time, and it was at the peak of the Vietnam War and the protests, and everybody came in with dirty jeans and T-shirts and bandanas, and I came in with a coat and tie and a white shirt. And I
And
told
stuff there for me. What did they want to write about? What were they? They were activists.
They were
really,
activists,
So
that's
how did their writing compare to peacetime versus whatever we have today?
well, they were, as you said,
they wanted
were
to
acti-
crucify somebody.
Well,
and-
they were activists,
All right.
and it was a troubling time in the country, obviously, and they wanted to write about it and protest. As a matter of fact, when I was editor of the paper here at Wayne, it was called the Daily Collegian.
Right.
It changed to the name to South End, which represented a political change. It represented South End because it was the south end of campus and represented a more liberal community. So that was all part of it. They were activists, and I told them, I'm the rebel in here because I got a tie on. You guys all look the same.
All right.
They all had the same uniform, but you're right. They were very active, very politically oriented. And of course, as times changed and settled down, their political activism ebbed quite a bit. Matter of fact, some people say there's an apathy. I don't think that's true. You didn't have that conflict in the country, and that represented itself in the students.
Sure.
And so you don't have that kind of. If you had a very volatile, national issue, I think that activism would give a rebirth to it. But at the time, you had
Sure.
riots all over the country, urban riots. So we had our own in
In
'67.
terms of students' abilities, are they consistent over the 45 years? Have they changed? Or are they impacted by political structure?
The major change I've seen in this is perhaps coming from an old codger, is a lack of interest in liberal humanities, literature, history, civics. I discovered that they didn't have that background anymore. They changed. I'm not saying I think it wasn't for the positive, but that may be me. And that bothered me. I wish they had had more of a orientation with history. And in the last few years, most of their reading was done on the internet and Yahoo rather than a long, nice book of 1,000 pages or so. And I understand that, but it bothered me a little bit. So I saw that change. Again, their commitment.
What did you do about it as a teacher?
Well, I talked with them. There's not much I could do other than discuss with them the importance of reading. Number one, to be a good writer, you be a vociferous reader and read everything. And I discussed it with them, and I said, again, if you want to improve your writing, you've got to read history, literature, Shakespeare, everything under the sun, from S. Thompson, Hunter Thompson, to Shakespeare, and you got to read and write, and that bothered me a little bit. Overall, I had the admiration for the students. I got a lot of satisfaction out of the 45 years. They did more for me than I did for them. It was a wonderful experience.
Interesting how I've had people tell me, teachers tell me that their students did more for them. And we talked to Beverly Burns, and I'm sure she would say that with Ben, he would tell you that his students made him better.
Absolutely.
And to hear you say it is interesting.
I knew Ben. I was in the governor's office from 70. Long before he came to Wayne, he was managing editor of the Lansing Journal. And I was in the governor's office. That's when I met Ben before he even came to it. So he absolutely.
Friendly, adversarial?
Oh,
whatever.
no, it was very friendly. I had the highest respect for him,
Yeah.
and a highly principled man. He and I talked a lot. And
How did he affect you, Burrow?
well, he was a wonderful boss. I could take anything to him. We might disagree, but it was a respectful relationship. His ethics and principles were second to none. This is what I enjoyed. I may be angry leaving his office with the decision he made, but I had the utmost respect for him.
It's interesting. When you take a look at other people in other departments talking about the impact players, the legendaries, what's really fascinating is that every single one of those legendaries, people who really had an influence on this great university, had personal integrity, personal honesty, and discipline, as Beverly mentioned earlier, had all those same characteristics. You'd have to say that that's what it takes to be a man like Ben Burns.
He was a fantastic director of the program. I learned a lot from him, and I valued that friendship. We had a close friendship.
Let's go back to what you said
Sure.
about your students. What did you learn from your students?
Well, again, commitment, and I look out there and I said, I know how they're doing it. They just finished a full day of work, and they had a total commitment, and I learned from that, that they come and spend 3.5 hours at night, and then they have to go home, an hour travel, and a real commitment, and I understood more deeply what sacrifice is all about. Many were married, and had children, some of them, and to make that commitment told me, that I had to make their time worthwhile, I had to work harder.
Very interesting. And it's a good thing for you to say that, because I sincerely believe that the students back then are the same as the students today.
Oh, absolutely.
They force you to work as a teacher.
You owe
And
it to
that's
them.
what you want.
You owe it to them.
Yeah,
Given
sure.
Given the sacrifice.
What do you owe your students? Your best teaching job.
Absolutely.
Every single day.
Absolutely.
Because I know that students in the audience and these people who are producing this show would demand your best. And if you don't give it, they're not going to respect you.
Absolutely.
It's true.
And the evaluations were very important to me. If they were, critical, I'd read them carefully and try to implement, the recommendations.
I'm going to ask you something. Here you've got this extremely distinguished career in journalism, as a writer, as an author, as a personality, as a speaker. You've got all this behind you. Why teach?
Well, you hope you make an impact. I got a lot of satisfaction of seeing somebody's byline in the paper. Now, I understand.
One of your students you taught?
Yeah, a lot of students over the years. They end up on papers or on television, And I was very proud. Now, I understood that I was a minute part of that, given that I had one class. But you hope that you contribute something to that. You didn't do it for the money. You didn't get paid a lot. But to see that, to see somebody do a story on television, on a news station, or see them on page one and say, look, that was my student. Again, I knew I wasn't alone. There were the Ben Burnses, the Sprague Holdens, and the Kims, and all the others. But you hope that you had a part in their futures.
You could have taught in Lansing. You could have taught in Ypsilanti. Could have taught in Ann Arbor. Could have taught in East Lansing. Why'd you come here?
I was a student here. I had 4 years, well, actually 5 years as an undergraduate student. I was editor of the paper. I was editor-in-chief for the last year. And I had an emotional attachment to Wayne. I loved Wayne. When I started at Wayne, there were 2 buildings on campus, Old Main and State Hall.
Right.
That was it.
Yes.
And I covered, as a reporter, the first new building, which was McGregor Memorial Building, the all-glass building by Yamasaki. And I had a tremendous attachment, so when I had lunch with Sprague Holden one day, I said to him, if you ever need a part-timer, consider me.
He jumped on you with both feet.
Well, he said to me, are you kidding? And I said, no. And the next fall, he hired me. No way did I know I'd be here for 45 years. But I had a strong feeling about Wayne. By the way, it turned into a state university 1 year after I enrolled. And I had a strong emotional attachment. So if I had a choice between U of M or state, not anything critical about them, but my attachment emotionally was to Wayne.
Real people.
Well, it was wonderful.
All the time.
It was wonderful. And when I first was a student, I took a bus from Dexter and took the Dexter bus and didn't have a car. And either went to State Hall or Old Main. Those were the only two buildings. And the rest of it were Army barracks over on Cass Avenue.
Sure. World War II, and people came back.
That's right.
And they still stayed in the service and got their education. Right. Well, Wayne State does grab your heart. Yeah. There's no question about that. People like you, me, Ben Burns, Ed Pappas. You could name them. Ed Pappas is featured in our other Legendaries program. It just seems to grab you.
Yeah.
Why does it grab you? The students.
The students, and it's an urban setting. I like the setting,
Sure.
The campus, we couldn't even call it a campus then, but I like the urban setting, and everybody, and I worked, and a lot of students didn't just come to school, but they all worked at the same time. They had part-time jobs.
Sure.
And I liked the entire environment. And Clarence Hilberry, and the Hilberry Theater is named after him, was president at the time.
He was, well, I have to tell you, you probably already know that you and I were students here at the same time.
Okay. Well, I was a little better than you.
You were a little, you were ahead of me by a year or so.
I'm joking.
But I remember President Hilberry had a big impact. Yeah. Popular, well-liked, although we students called him Mulberry, but that's right? Another story.
No, he was a great man.
But he was a great president. And it's just warms your heart to be back, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And I miss it. I miss it. Yeah, I still miss it. I enjoy it.
You're back here for the kids.
That's right.
For the students.
I enjoy it.
Not for us.
No.
Not for anybody else.
That's right.
We're talking about Legendaries who are also here for the students.
That's what it's all about. And like I say, I still see students around, who I had in my classes, and it gives you some pride.
Right.
And you enjoy it.
You've had an enormously successful career. You have a wonderful name. You're noted for your integrity and your honesty and your backbone, and your words will last forever. How do you evaluate your own life personally? Throw away your ego, because you're talking to us.
Well, first of all, I got to thank you for your extremely kind words. I'm not sure I'm justified.
Throw away your modesty.
No, I've enjoyed I consider myself a newspaper man. I still write a lot of political columns for local papers. And the newspaper, even though I went to other fields after leaving the news and politics and corporate life, underneath it all, if you would ask me what I said a newspaper man. Okay. When I was in PR and ended up in some city room to do some PR, I'd just sit there and inhale the environment. I loved the ink.
Right.
I loved the atmosphere of a city room.
Right.
And
so much of it is because of Wayne State.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I owe it all to Wayne.
Burl, thank you.
Thank you.
For being here.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back.
Thank you.
I'm running to something. Always forward. Not afraid to do it myself. Gotta fight to make a difference. Somebody's gotta lead. It's going to be me. I'll always aim higher.
Welcome back, everybody. So far in the program, we've talked about the administration and the growth of the department itself, journalism, and how it came about. We talked about a tremendous legendary, Ben Burns, one of the great persons in the history of this entire university in terms of his impact, and to remember him is to remember a true legend. And we've also talked about the students with Burl here and Burl Fallbaum's experience of dealing with students and how they came here and how the kind of people they are and that sort of thing. Now we're going to talk about, and with somebody who's done something about it. What do you do with these students? What kind of activities do you put them in? How do you get them to look at their future? Well, we're going to look at a person, the great Luther Keith. I call him that because of the impact he has had. It's easy to refer to him as a living legendary, and he's going to be remembered way beyond the taping of this show. And we're just so lucky to have him. And now let's welcome a legendary himself, the great Luther Keith. Luther!
Thank you, thank you.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we know about you.
Wow.
A little bit.
Thanks for the applause. That was
well,
nice.
the thing I know about you is you don't like to talk about yourself. I know that.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell you, throw that modesty out the door.
Okay, I'll do that.
Because we've talked about the students themselves. We talked about the organization of the department and all that. What we haven't talked about is what has been done for these kids in terms of giving them opportunities to join something that's meaningful to them and that kind of thing. And you're the first director of JIM, first managing director. So let's get right into it. First, what is JIM?
Well, when it started in 1985, it was founded as the Journalism Institute for Minorities. Now it's the Journalism Institute for Media Diversity. And at that time in particular, we didn't have much diversity in the newspaper business and the media in general. And while at that time I was an assistant city editor at the Detroit News, I made a lot of noise about the fact that we need to get some journalists of color into our newsroom. And the response was, well, we don't know where to find them, or they aren't interested, which was not a satisfactory response to me. And so what Wayne State...
You took that as a challenge, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, I did. And what Wayne State did is, you talk about Ben Burns, who actually was my boss at the Detroit News, approaching with this idea for this new concept, which hadn't been done before. It was truly a landmark effort to create a program to recruit and train minorities for opportunities, to give them scholarships, to give them training and internships, and ultimately give them jobs so they could have an impact on our society.
And who was going to create that program?
Well, they asked me Luther, would you consider being the director? And it was kind of putting me on the spot.
Sure.
But
put your money where your mouth is.
But I felt it had to be done. And Jim, one of the things that I think Wayne State does not get credit for, the Journalism Institute for Minorities, as it was founded, even as it's constructed today, was not just a journalism program. It was a social justice program. It was a social justice program because America, or United States as a nation, will never be what it aspires to be unless it truly reflects all of the people and all of the voices. And our country is founded on the free press and everyone's ideas. And if we're ever going to reach that goal, we must have people of color at all positions in the media. And I think Wayne State really deserves so much credit for having the vision, and Ben Burns and the journalism people who were here at that time, having the vision to say, this is something we're going to do. So, and it wasn't always popular to do, but look at us now, all these years later, and these journalists are working in media outlets, and it's truly breathtaking to see what it has become.
So let's start from the beginning. You're the first director. What did you do to make it what it is today?
Well, the first thing that when Ben came to me, and I want to preface by saying, Ben, I hardly knew Ben at the Detroit News. He was a big-time editor. I was a lowly peon assistant city editor at the Detroit News. He did not even have to acknowledge my existence.
Luther,
So
I'm going to have to tell you, you ain't lowly, man. You ain't not lowly.
At that time, I was lowly. Okay. And Ben called me into his office. I was quite stunned and said, look, we got this idea. And I was intrigued by it, but this is what I told him. And I'll repeat, this is exactly what I told him. I am not interested in running a remedial program for colored kids. That's not what I'm about.
Right.
I'm not about dragging up kids who can't read and saying we're going to make them journalists. I'm willing to do this on one condition, and one condition only. We're going to recruit the best and the brightest young people of color that we can find and give them the training to be the best that they can be.
Noble cause. That really is noble.
And that's what it, because the talent was out there.
Were you able to do that?
I think we were, and it's proof today by evidence. Literally 2 days after this taping, one of the students out of that program, a young lady named Vicki Thomas, who's been a reporter for WWG Radio, is being inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame.
How about that?
She came through this program, and there are others like her that have gone on to be anchors and producers and editors in Michigan and all over the country. And so I know we've been able to do that. But again, our work is not done, and we must continue to push forward with it. But it's a great thing. For me, I heard you talking about Burl Faubin about seeing bylines of the students, and I can see bylines of reporters at the News or the Free Press or the Michigan Chronicle or wherever, or anchor people like a young lady named Derek Chisholm went to Cass Tech, became an anchor in Pittsburgh. It's an amazing thing to have a small impact on people's lives.
Let's just go back a minute, because this is fascinating. You started out the concept, and you're put on the spot as new director, and you need to find people. How did you find them?
Well, one thing that was very important is we formed a partnership with the local media and some of our corporate community. And the concept was this: we're going to ask you to invest in these young people. We're going to ask you to provide scholarship money. We're going to ask you to provide internships. With the idea being that if John Jones or Sally Jones, you hire her as an intern, him or her intern, for 2 or 3 years or even 1 year, you get a good gauge of that person's ability.
Sure.
So by the time that person graduates, you should know that that person is capable, hopefully, of doing that job. So why invest in the unknown instead of something you know, somebody you know is talented, somebody you've seen do the job? It's a smart business decision to hire that person that was your intern.
Absolutely.
So it's really important that we built the program on internships. Get internships, get experience.
And the companies responded.
They did, and actually they did, and it was kind of an unproven, uncharted territory.
Of course.
But it happened.
How'd you find the kids?
Well, we sent out the announcements to all the local, to the school system, and announcements in the newspaper.
What about churches?
I don't know if we approached churches specifically, but I know we had a major partnership with Detroit Public Schools and schools in general.
Okay.
And actually, we hired Wayne State hired a PR firm. I went on a speaking tour for about a month, all over all the media, the television, about this new program at Wayne State to get people excited about it. And we started getting response to the students. Now, I was not an academic. Subsequently, I taught several different occasions at Wayne State and other universities, but I had a very uninformed view of the type of the best students. Part of my career, I was a sports writer for the Detroit News. I actually covered Magic Johnson in high school, to tell you how old I am. And you first, like when you were recruiting a basketball or football star, you're looking for the one who can jump the highest, run the fastest, got the best shot. So I started recruiting students. Give me the one with the highest SAT scores, the highest ACT scores, the best grade point average, all the blue chip stuff, and evaluate the person. And that's important. But what I learned as I evaluate some of these students, that some of the students with the best test scores or the best grade point, they weren't hungry to be journalists.
Right.
I found other students may not have had a high grade point, but they hungered to be a journalist. And what I found
That's
out,
what you want.
that hunger, that passion to be a journalist
What you want.
is so, so important.
Oh, yeah.
And if I may inject this, I think journalism is a high, high calling. It's a high calling to this nation. Doctors get, they get degrees, doctors or lawyers, and they're all important. I mean, anybody can be a journalist technically, but to be a truly trained journalist is a high, high calling. You're playing an important role in your community, in your nation, and it's something that I think you approach with, you can't take lightly. So it requires that passion. Yeah. Because it's not going to be easy. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to get defeated. People are going to tell you no. Yeah. They're going to say, this is lousy. Luther, this stinks. Rewrite it. Rewrite it again. Rewrite it 1,000 times. You're going to work for editors that's going to get on your nerves. Sure. They're going to rewrite your stories. But it's worth it. It's worth it.
There's an old saying in the business world years ago that probably true today, in that any company or organization, that the A students will end up working for the B students. Because the B students had to work harder, they got more desire. You were looking for B students who could write.
Well, I think in many respects that's really what I was. I was a B student.
Sure.
I was a B student in high school. Sometimes I got an A in college. But I always, from my personal standpoint, I've always been I never was a leader of any organization growing up. I was never a leader in anything, except I wrote for my student newspaper in college. But I wanted to be a journalist. And that passion is so important, and persistence. And I think that's important. The other thing that I always stress with all of the students is that even if you're a minority student or you're a woman, that is not good enough. The best thing you can be is be the best you can be. And I've said this, and you may not understand this. I think I told Ben this at one point. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to hire a black journalist. I want that black journalist to go to your newspaper. I want that black journalist to fall on their face, be the worst reporter that you ever had, but I don't want it to be held against the next black reporter. And that's what we ran up against. Oh, we had one that didn't work out. But I've never heard that.
Yes.
Well, we had a white reporter that didn't work out. We can't hire any more white people. You never hear that.
No.
So my goal is to rise or fall on your merits. And here's what I say. Be the best person at that staff, at that news. When you look around that newsroom, you're going to say, you know what? I can't stand Luther Keith. He gets on my nerves, but doggone, he's the best writer we got. We got to use him. Yes. That's what I want. And that's what I want for every kid out here. And I believe you can accomplish it, but you got to go for it. You can't cheat yourself. You can't look in the mirror and say, well, I'm cute. Why didn't they hire me? No. You got to work for it. You got to want it. You got to get up when you're knocked down. And it's going to be such a great feeling, though, when you realize what you have done.
What do you guys think of that so far? Wow. Wow. When do I start? Do you have much incidence of people coming through your program, being successful, and then coming back to help you get more people?
Well, I know that, I'm not necessarily to get more people, but to come back and indicate that Wayne State and the role I played there had a difference. Young lady, I think I mentioned earlier, a young lady named Darius Chisholm from Cass Tech High School. She came to me as a junior at Cass Tech because she had heard about the program. I said, you got to be a senior, you got to graduate from high school first. She came back. She was been a very successful anchor in Pittsburgh. I mean, an A-list anchor in Pittsburgh. Came back. Her family still lives in Detroit. She came back. Of course, Vicki Thomas. Now it's so ironic because now I'm being interviewed. My day job now, I run a nonprofit here that's involved in community organizing here in Detroit. And
we're going to talk about a rise in a minute.
And it's so ironic when my former students and people out of my program are interviewing me. That's kind of like it's almost surreal. But it's a great feeling. And here's the other thing. When I was ready to go to college, and I went to the University of Detroit, it's now called the University of Detroit Mercy, I didn't have any money to go to college. My mother told me, we don't have any money. And there was a program that at that time the University of Detroit created that allowed me to go to college. And so I think it's a beautiful thing for me to be able to play a role in providing opportunity for other young people. And I think at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, because you're only here for a minute. And so when you're gone, what have you done for somebody else that had some kind of impact? And what I simply try to do is make a small contribution in the way and let these young people really rise. And it's a wonderful thing to see that happen.
Right. Oh, it sure is. And God bless you for all that you're doing. And that leads to Arise.
Right.
Tell us all about
Okay,
Arise.
Arise.
What is it? What do you do for it?
Okay.
What is
Okay.
it doing?
Well, Rise actually is an outgrowth of my newspaper career. Reach a crossroads and you say, where's my next move? And actually, at that time, I was a senior editor in columns for the Detroit News. I would write about, when you're a columnist, you're an expert on everything. So I can write about anything. And I'd write about how we can improve the community. And people would say, well, that's a good idea, Luther. Who's going to do it? And then I would have white readers email me or call me and say, well, Luther, why aren't black folks doing anything to help their city? Then black folks would email or call me and say, we're trying to form a block club or literacy program, and we need some publicity. Can you help us with that? And what had occurred to me was that we had hundreds of organizations working hard every day, but either we weren't hearing their impact or no one was telling about the impact. So I thought that we needed a program not to feed or clothe or shelter, but to support all the groups that are already doing that. So the mentoring program that has 20 can get 40. The cleanup program has 40, get them 80. The literacy program that has 80, get them 100. So the idea was that we were going to issue a clarion call and challenge the community to get involved. And Arise is actually an acronym. It stands for Activating Resources, Inspiring Service, and Empowerment.
How did you do the clarion call?
Well, we used the media. We had great support from some of our foundations, the Skillman Foundation.
Did you go back to the companies?
Some of them, yes. And of course, we were fortunately, this idea was funded initially by the Skillman Foundation, now the Cressy Foundation. And a lot of corporations are involved now. What we've been able to do is motivate people to get involved to improve their neighborhoods. We don't come out and solve your program, but if you want to do something, we will get the resources, we'll recruit the volunteers, and motivate you to get involved because you are living in this neighborhood. And so the idea is that we mobilize people to get involved. My mother had an expression, I know Jesus is coming, but he's probably not coming tonight. So that being the case, what are you going to do? You are living on that block. The mayor's not living on that block. The president's not living on that block. Your preacher's not living on that block. You live on that block. Yeah, they all have obligations, but what are you going to do at the end of the day? And here's one thing I always stress. We started as a kind of a volunteer organization, but we're much bigger than that because we created something called Neighborhoods Day, where we have over 200 community service projects on the same day all over Detroit. No other city does this in America. But here's the thing. Volunteerism, you hear a lot of people talk about. What we're doing is much bigger than volunteerism. And the best way I can tell you this is, you have children?
Sure. Grandchildren.
Did you volunteer to take care of your kids? Obviously not.
Goes with the territory.
No. Yeah, but you don't call it it's called parenting. Sure. It's called, you have an obligation. That's your son, that's your daughter. You don't volunteer to take care of a child. And so what we're trying to create, and the people in Detroit, to some extent we've been successful, that everyone has a role to play. If this is your community, you need to be doing something. Very briefly, C.T. Vivian, a contemporary of Dr. Martin Luther King, who I heard speak right here at Wayne State University, said during the civil rights boycott, the Montgomery boycott, they would ask you a question. Say, what are you doing for the movement? What are you doing for the movement to make things better? I'm feeding people. I'm letting them sleep in my house. I'm driving them to work. But the idea is you are going to have an answer to this question. So if I ask you, a Detroiter, what are you doing for your community? I'm raising my kids and make sure they graduate from high school. That's good. I'm a part of a patrol. I'm watching kids come home from school. That's great. I'm helping some people read. I'm keeping my lawn clean. I'm on a patrol for my community. But do something. Doesn't have to be a big thing. Everyone has a role to play, and that's what we try to do with Arise Detroit.
Right, and that's a tremendous activity. And also, you'd have to probably say there's a fundamental focus that begins when you're a kid. And you talked about your mother. My mother had a tremendous impact on my life, and I can still hear her saying, when I was about 10 years old, Jimmy, you listen to me. All God's children mean all God's children. Do you hear me, boy? All God's children. And I'll never forget that.
Right.
included everybody.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental part. If you
Yes.
get that fundamental
Yeah.
part, then you get to arise and you get to what you're doing.
Yeah, you know, Jim, I think it's so important because we all have so much more in common than what we see. We're arguing about so many things.
Sure.
Here's people ask me when I left the newspaper, and I had a tremendously successful career, far beyond my wildest dreams as a journalist. Do you miss being a journalist? And I would say, well, not really, because when I was a columnist, no matter what you write, you cannot make everyone happy. I could write a column saying we should all love each other. I'd get an email back saying, Luther, you idiot. What do you mean by that? Now when people ask me what I do, I say, well, I run a nonprofit to help children and families improve life in Detroit. Nobody says, like, I'm against that. I want to fight you about that. They say, oh, really? How do you do that? Can I help you? So every day I'm meeting people in a place of common ground, in a place of hope, a place where if we have problems, let's work together to solve them. And that has made Arise Detroit grow from an organization that started 12 years ago with 22 organizations to more than 400. We are part of organizations that mobilize thousands of volunteers all across the neighborhoods of Detroit. It's united. Black people, white people, people of all income levels, cities, suburbs, people from out of state, because we all have a common vision for a better community.
You guys hear that? You guys hear that? Do you know why I referred to him as the great Luther Keith? Huh? I think we should give him a standing ovation. Sit down. Here we go. Come on, you guys.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right. Okay. I'm going to ask you something now.
Okay.
Who is Luther Badman Keith?
Oh, you got me there.
Come on.
Okay. That is my alter ego. Late in my journalism career, or by this time I was in my 30s, I had never played music growing up. I think the only thing I played growing up was baseball and the radio. And I discovered this thing called the blues, and I went to see a blues guitar player. And I said, wow, I really would like to learn how this. And so I set off on a path to learn how to play the guitar. Was terrible for 15 years. And one day someone said, you're kind of sounding good. You should form a band. And since then, I formed a band. And Badman is my performing name, Luther Badman Keith.
Muhammad Ali.
Muhammad Ali, that was given to me by...
I'm bad.
That's right, because, you know, when I started to play music, I said, I can't be just Luther Keith. That is a dull, boring name. I got to have a name with some flavor. And so one day, if you all remember the Muhammad Ali clip where he says, I'm a bad man, and my drummer people were clapping after we had finished the song, and they said, get up for him. He's a bad man. I said, like, bad man. Luther Badman Keith. That's it. That's my name. And
A blues musician.
yes.
Let's hear it for Luther Badman Keith. Thank you, Luther.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very
Thank
good.
you. All right.
We'll be right back.
Visit our 200-acre campus in the heart of Midtown.
Visit our new buildings.
Scott Chemistry.
Danto Engineering.
Wayne Law Ski Center.
The Towers.
See our classic buildings. McGregor.
School of Business. Apprentice.
Old Main.
The Freer House.
We invite you to visit our medical school, known for urban clinical excellence.
See where we perform.
The Hillberry.
Sabre Hall. The Bonsdale.
The Alice.
Visit a premier research university.
Schedule a tour of our campus.
Because one visit to Wayne State will lead to a lifetime of opportunities.
Well, what a show we've had. We've talked about the journalism department here at Wayne State and how it began. We talked with the Dean Matt Seeger and the unbelievably talented Kim Piper-Aiken. Kim Piper-Aiken runs this show. She's our boss, and it's only part of what Kim does. But she's talked about it from her perspective as well and her background. And then we talked to three wonderful guests. We talked about the great Ben Burns, the unbelievably legendary Ben Burns, through the eyes of his wife, Beverly. And we talked to Burl Fahlbaum, who has had a great experience in the field of journalism, who teaches here, who teaches the kids and has done it for 45 years. And then we talked to a man, the great Luther Keith. I call him that because he's done something about it. And he started out, and it's obvious, he wouldn't say this, but it's obvious that other people have looked at Luther Keith and seen the talent and the dedication and the go-to guy that he is. And through him, working with others, we've had some outstanding programs where students, particularly minority students here at Wayne State, can join this organization and get trained and get into the field. A wonderful program. I'd like to thank you for being here in the heart of this wonderful university, Wayne State. It's our school. It's a school of real people, real students. Thank you, and goodbye for now.